Hello, I'm kicking off 2025's Horror Month with a review of the 1983 slasher film Sleepaway Camp. Now, Sleepaway Camp was written and directed by Robert Hiltzik, and this came out during what a lot of people call the early 80s slasher boom, which you could argue technically started in the late 70s with John Carpenter's Halloween in 1978. But it was really Sean Cunningham's Friday the 13th in 1980 that kicked it open, and while both Halloween and Friday the 13th would inspire so much of the slasher genre going forward, Friday the 13th specifically, and its sequels, would really inspire almost like a subgenre within a subgenre with the camp slasher films, which are slasher films set at summer camp or set in the woods, i.e. movies like The Burning, Madman, and Don't Go in the Woods. And Sleepaway Camp is one of the more well-known of the quote-unquote Friday the 13th cash-ins. Now, I must confess, I did not grow up with Sleepaway Camp the way I did so many other slasher films. I had seen parts of the sequels when I was a teenager, and I grew up knowing about the movie and knowing of the film's reputation, but again, I didn't actually see the film in its entirety until 2023. It was actually playing at a drive-in theater in Pennsylvania, and I have to confess, it's not one of my favorites. No offense to anybody who does really love this movie. Don't get me wrong, I do like the movie, and I have a lot of respect for it, but again, it's not one of my favorites of the early 80s slasher films. And I have seen the film subsequently since then, and I will say it's grown on me a bit more, and again, I do have a lot of respect for this movie, and I have a huge respect for its fan base and its legacy. I mean, I liked it well enough to get the Blu-ray. Granted, I'm already a collector of physical media, but I am at the point now where I really do have to be kind of picky and choosy over what I actually buy because, frankly, I don't have any room for anything anymore. So the plot of Sleepaway Camp is it begins where this father is out on the lake with his kids, and these teenagers are messing around on their boat, and one thing leads to another, and the teenager's boat accidentally hits the father and his two kids, killing the father and one of the children. We jump ahead to 7 years later, and we follow a 13-year-old girl named Angela, who is presumably one of the children from the beginning of the movie who survived the boating accident, but she's now living with her aunt and her cousin Ricky. And right off the bat, we can tell something is not right about Angela's aunt. Like, there's something very off about this woman, and Angela herself is a very shy, quiet girl, and we get an idea that she's probably dealing with a lot of trauma, being what happened to her father and her brother in the beginning of the film. But Angela and Ricky are sent off to summer camp, and Ricky is relatively popular, whereas Angela is pretty much a social outcast and is mercilessly bullied by the other campers there, and even one of the counselors. Ricky does his best to stick up for Angela, but the torments keep coming, but Angela does develop a relationship with Ricky's best friend. But while all this teen drama is going on, there's a killer at the camp, killing the campers and even some of the counselors. So the film stars Felissa Rose as Angela, who honestly does a great job. Honestly, she's probably one of the better things about this movie. Not that I don't like the movie, but in terms of acting, she gives one of the better performances in the film. Like, she gives Angela a sympathetic and likable personality, and there's a real sweetness to her as well, which makes the ending all the more shocking. But throughout the movie, you can tell something's off. And she also can be genuinely creepy in the film as well. Now, massive spoilers, but she's the killer in the movie. But I feel like that's telegraphed pretty early on in the film, if we're being honest. But an even bigger twist than her simply being the killer is what's revealed about the Angela character at the end. So again, massive spoiler, but at the end of the film, we see her standing naked over the body of her latest victim. Don't worry, they used a body double for her, considering Felissa Rose was only 14 when they shot this. But when they zoom out, we realize that Angela has a penis. The body double they used was actually a male college student who was wearing a mask of Felissa Rose's face, and to this day, I don't think he's ever been named, and according to Jonathan Tiersten, the actor who plays Ricky in the movie, apparently the guy was really nervous about doing the scene, and apparently got pissed drunk before they shot it. Basically, we learn that at the beginning of the film, when the father and his two kids are hit by that boat, it was the girl who was killed, not the boy, but the boy was put in the care of his aunt, and his aunt was fucking psychotic and basically forced him to live as a girl. And it's considered one of the most infamous and shocking twists in horror movie history, and honestly, I think it's the reason the film had such a huge cult following. Like, I don't think the movie would have been as well remembered if not for that twist ending. Now, as you can imagine, it has led to some accusations of transphobia. At the same time, there are a lot of people in the transgendered community who have embraced the film and have embraced the character of Angela Baker as a trans character. Now, I must point out that as a cisgendered heterosexual male, I might not be completely qualified to talk about this, but I almost feel like calling Angela Baker a transgendered character could be considered a little problematic, considering Angela had this gender forced upon them. This wasn't a case where they legitimately felt like they were born into the wrong body. In Angela's case, they were forced into being a girl by their psychotic aunt. And of course, that whole concept of people forcing children to be transgendered, that's an argument that a lot of people on the political right seem to use, usually as just an excuse for their transphobia, or as an excuse to take transgendered people's rights away from them. So again, with that subplot, I could see the film being considered somewhat problematic by today's standards. But again, as a heterosexual cisgendered male, I don't know if I'm completely qualified to talk upon that. And again, the film has been embraced by a lot of people in the gay and transsexual community. Now, I do think how the film tackles sexuality is very interesting, especially for a 1983 film, because in the flashbacks, we find out that Angela's father was actually gay. And in the brief scenes we see the father with his boyfriend, it seems to be portrayed as a pretty positive relationship, which again, was honestly surprising for the early 80s. But this does create some confusion on Angela's part when she's questioning her own sexuality, especially knowing that she's at least biologically male. But again, how the film tackles gender and sexuality is actually pretty interesting, if not a little problematic by today's standards. And knowing that Angela is the killer in the movie, it's also a very clever twist on the final girl trope, where essentially our final girl is the villain. Now, I had actually met Felissa Rose twice. Both times she was doing live commentaries on the movie, which if you ever get a chance to see one of those, they're fucking hilarious. Honestly, she has a great sense of humor about the film, and both times I've met her, she was very nice. From what I can tell, she's absolutely lovely to her fans. And I actually know some people who know her personally. There's this horror-themed brewery in Farmingdale, New York that I go to sometimes called Necromantic, and the owner of that place, he's actually friends with Felissa Rose. And the second time I met her was actually at that bar. She's done a few events there, and apparently Robert Hiltzik was there once. Now, something that the movie does that is actually pretty atypical for a slasher film around this time is the teenage characters are actually played by teenagers. Because in a lot of slasher films and movies in general around this time, they would have teenage characters played by people who are clearly in their 20s, or sometimes even 30s in some cases. But the fact that you have the teenagers actually played by teenagers in this gives the film a real authenticity that a lot of other slasher films from around the time period really don't have. And that was something that was very important to Robert Hiltzik, is making this look and feel like summer camp. I also really liked Jonathan Tiersten as Ricky. Ricky is a really likable character, and you really do feel for him when he's trying to stick up for Angela. And there are points in the movie where he's a little bit of a dick, especially when him and his friends are pulling pranks on this kid named Mozart. But at the same time, what kid that age wasn't like that? He also has one of the greatest comebacks in cinema history. It's during a baseball game. Somebody from the rival team says, "Eat shit and die, Ricky." And Ricky just says, "Eat shit and live, Bill." And again, the child actors in the movie really feel very authentic. That being said, some of the actors playing the adult characters in the movie are kind of hilariously bad, especially the woman playing Angela's aunt. And the actress playing Angela's aunt is Desiree Gould, I think is how you say the last name. She is an absolute cartoon character in this, but to some degree, I think that was done intentionally just to show how psychotic this woman is, where it almost makes sense that Angela turned out the way they did. You also had Robert Earl Jones as one of the cooks at the camp. Now, he is actually James Earl Jones's father. You also have Mike Kellin as Mel, the owner of the camp, and this guy is such a sleazebag. Like, when the murders start happening, he tries keeping it under wraps because he doesn't want to get sued. He's also clearly trying to sleep with one of the counselors, and while they never say how old the girl is, she looks about 17, and this guy is in his late 50s or early 60s at least. I also really liked Paul DeAngelo as Ronnie, who is one of the counselors. Like, I'm not going to say he's a great actor per se, but the character of Ronnie is honestly really likable, and you can tell that he really does care about these kids. But at the same time, what the fuck is with those shorts? Now, besides Angela herself and her aunt, who is sort of the overarching antagonist of the movie, there are three sort of side villains in the movie who are absolutely despicable. One is the character of Judy, played by Karen Fields, and this character reminded me a lot of the character of Chris from Stephen King's Carrie, where she's sort of just evil for the sake of being evil, and she relentlessly bullies Angela throughout the film, really for no reason whatsoever. Like, when you watch the movie, this girl really has no reason to hate Angela as much as she does. In a lot of ways, she almost is the real villain of the film. Like, if she were real, you would almost want to say to her, "You're the problem here, not Angela." But who I honestly hated more than Judy was Meg, because Meg is one of the counselors. She's supposed to be looking out for the well-being of the kids, yet she's just as much of a bully as Judy is. Like, there are moments where both Judy and Meg are sort of ganging up on Angela, and you almost want to say, what the fuck is your problem? But I would say the most despicable character in the movie is Artie, who is the head cook at the camp in the beginning of the film, who turns out to be a pedophile who tries to molest Angela at one point until he's stopped by Ricky. And he gets a great and well-deserved comeuppance when the killer, who of course we find out at the end was Angela, causes a pot of boiling water to fall on him, and we get probably one of the film's best practical effects, where the guy is writhing in agony on the floor while his skin is bubbling because he got all the boiling water on him, and it lingers on this shot so much where you get kind of uncomfortable and you almost start to pity him. But at the same time, we gotta remember this guy did try to molest Angela, so yeah, I really can't feel that sorry for you. Now here is Joey, who's appeared in some of my Friday the 13th videos from a few years ago, but here is him giving his thoughts on the original Sleepaway Camp.
Sleepaway Camp is a 1983 movie. It's one of my favorite horror movies, B-movies. It stars Felissa Rose. Recommend this movie if you haven't seen it. And it's in the same class as Friday the 13th, which came out around that same time. But yeah, like I said in my other reviews, that these movies from the 80s were really the best times, and that's why I'm glad they got the reruns of it still. You know, these kind of movies I never get bored with. I can watch them all the time. And where the guy got burned in that one scene, it was the effects with that were like cool effects, because it was like it looked real, but they used to use special effects in these movies, so that's why it looked more real. It was cool. It was better than the computers, like I said in my other reviews. And then there was the some of the other effects too in here. The makeup effects and stuff are really cool. Anyway, it's a cool B movie, so yeah, I recommend it to watching it and checking it out.
So like I said, Sleepaway Camp, it's not one of my favorites, but it is a film that I have an appreciation for, and it's a movie that does grow on me whenever I watch it. That being said, the movie is certainly not perfect. In fact, there are a lot of legitimate problems with this film. A lot of the film really does feel very amateurish, and Hiltzik also makes some very weird directing choices in this, and again, with the exception of Felissa Rose and Jonathan Tiersten and some of the other teenage and child actors in the movie, a lot of the adult actors in this film are almost cartoonishly bad. And there are parts of the movie where you could tell Hiltzik is trying to take this seriously, and there are even parts of the film that feel relatively grounded, and then there are aspects of the film that are just so painfully over the top. There's also this unintentionally hilarious moment where, so in the movie there's this cop who has a mustache, and apparently during production, the actor playing the cop had to shave the mustache because he was doing another project that required that he shaved. Literally in the same scene, we see the cop's mustache change. Like, one minute he has a real mustache, and then when he comes out of the cabin, we see him with an obviously fake mustache. But yeah, the film, it's very campy, no pun intended, and there are a lot of stupid things in the film. Granted, you could say that about almost any slasher film from this time period, but I would argue that there are a lot of slasher movies from the early 80s that are a lot more well-made and well-acted than people give them credit for. At the same time, all the movie's faults do kind of add a certain charm to the movie. And again, I understand why people love the movie as much as they do, and I do have a respect for the movie. And if nothing else, the movie does have some brutal and original kills, and some very good practical effects. And the film is also pretty ballsy too, no pun intended. Like, there are things in this movie that they would not be able to get away with today, at least not in the same way. So just on that level alone, I really do respect this movie. So Sleepaway Camp would develop a huge cult following over the years and ended up spawning 4 sequels and a novelization, and the character of Angela Baker and Felissa Rose herself would become kind of a minor horror icon. Now, this movie I'm about to bring up technically has nothing to do with Sleepaway Camp, but in the late 80s there was a slasher film called Memorial Valley Massacre, which later on would fall into the public domain, and I actually have it on Chilling Classics, which is one of those 50 movie packs from Mill Creek. Now again, this movie technically has nothing to do with Sleepaway Camp, however in Europe it was released as Son of Sleepaway Camp, which really makes no fucking sense whatsoever. Again, it really isn't connected to the Sleepaway Camp franchise, but in Europe it's released as sort of an unofficial sequel, so I felt like it was at least worth mentioning. Sleepaway Camp has also been parodied on Robot Chicken, and I'm sure there are some other pop culture references and parodies of the movie that I'm probably skipping over. And there's currently a Sleepaway remake in the works, which is going to be produced by Keevan Thompson of Keevan and Kel and all that, and currently of SNL fame. And apparently Robert Hiltzik is going to be directing again. Now, before I end this video, I want to cut to my friend Jeremy giving his thoughts on Sleepaway Camp.
Sleepaway Camp is a pretty entertaining slasher film from 1983. It's got some great kills, and the characters are all really over the top and ridiculously cruel and mean-spirited, which makes their death scenes even more entertaining to watch. Plot concerns Angela Baker and her cousin Ricky Thomas going to sleepaway camp at Camp Arawak, where a series of grisly murders soon start to occur. And as I mentioned before, so many of the characters are really over the top and ridiculously cruel and mean-spirited. In fact, some of them are downright scumbags. The head chef named Artie is a pedophile who tries to molest Angela. One of the camp counselors named Meg is a total bitch who yells and screams at Angela, all because she doesn't like that Angela doesn't participate in any of the activities. And the camp owner named Mel is an asshole who doesn't even care that people are dying and just wants to sweep it under the rug so that the camp doesn't get shut down and he doesn't lose any money. They're all really detestable characters. In one scene, Meg starts angrily screaming at Angela, all because Angela doesn't want to go swimming with everyone else. She even starts violently shaking her, till one of the other counselors makes her stop and reprimands her for her actions. The whole Camp Arawak staff are all pretty irresponsible, and one example of this is when some of the campers actually go onto the roof of one of the cabins and start throwing water balloons at each other. Why the fuck were they allowed to go on the roof in the first place, and why the fuck weren't the counselors watching them? That's definitely a lawsuit waiting to happen right there. The death scenes are all really gruesome and creative, and the blood and gore effects are really good as well. The cast do a pretty good job. Felissa Rose is so sweet as Angela, and really does a good job making her a likable character that you feel sorry for. I had the great pleasure of meeting her on December 8th, 2024, and she was really nice, and it's obvious that she loves her fans. Jonathan Tiersten has a lot of energy while he plays Angela's foul-mouthed cousin Ricky. He's constantly coming to Angela's defense when he sees that she's getting picked on, and lets out a profanity-laden tirade against the bullies that's very entertaining to watch. Desiree Gould is really weird and unsettling as Aunt Martha. Right from the get-go, you can tell that something is very off with her. I also really enjoy watching Mike Kellin as Mel. The guy's such a sleazy asshole who doesn't even care about the welfare of the campers. This was sadly Mike Kellin's final film, as he was suffering from lung cancer during filming and died in August 1983, which was just 3 months before the film's release. May he rest in peace. All in all, the entire cast is fun to watch. And of course, I just have to talk about that infamous twist ending in which, spoiler alert, it turns out that Angela is really a boy. This was a very shocking twist, and I don't know if they'd be able to get away with that today, as it would certainly be a very touchy subject. Anyway, I'll wrap up here. If you're a fan of slasher films, then I highly recommend you give this one a watch.
So I hope you enjoyed that. That was my review of Sleepaway Camp, and my next movie review will be on Sleepaway Camp 2, Unhappy Campers.